information regarding world religions. Okay, that we're not going to sit here and say that we're going to cover everything about Islam in one night, in 30 minutes or less. Okay, that's impossible. That's a ridiculous claim. So what we're really just trying to do is give you guys a basic rundown of what they believe and how that affects the way that we communicate with them and share our faith with them. Okay, one of the first things to understand is where it came from. So the word Islam actually means self-surrender to Allah, and it comes from the same root word as salam, or peace. Okay, if you, I know that there's a lot of stuff that we see in the news about the radical Muslims and everything else, but if you actually sit down and talk with some, there are actually some really nice people. As part of the class that I had at OC, we had to go and interact with people of different faiths, and the group that I was a part of actually went to go do a dinner with a group of Sufi Muslims. Most of the time you hear of Sunni or Shia, but there are a bunch of other groups as well. Sufi are a little bit more different. They're a little bit more laid back, basically, but they were really nice. Okay, there's some cultural things that you got to be aware of, and so if you're talking to an Arab person, more likely than not, they're accustomed to talking like this. Hi. Okay, that's just Middle Eastern culture. Okay, it's Middle Eastern culture to get kind of in your face, especially if you're like talking about a transaction. Okay, it's like a game for them, and as far as I can tell, it's almost fun for them to sit there and trying to see how much they can work you down. Okay, and it's not like they're trying to insult; it's just their culture. Okay, in fact, another part of their culture would be what Aiden's doing right now with his leg crossed like this. In fact, Josiah too. Showing your feet, the bottom of your feet in particular, that's like height. That's you might as well be giving them a finger. Okay. Now sometimes, listen. Sometimes they might realize that you don't know that and take that into account, and they might just say something and say, if it really bothers them, they might just say, "Do you mind putting your foot down?" That's just in our culture, that's a taboo thing. You don't do that. Okay. If you guys remember from the story of Ruth, whenever Boaz makes a transaction with the kinsman redeemer that should have taken Elimelech's property, he swaps sandals with the guy. Okay. In fact, whenever Ruth approaches Boaz to request marriage, she approaches Boaz and she uncovers his feet. Okay? I don't know the deal, but in Middle Eastern culture, feet are a big thing. I don't know why. But so it's just important to understand that the culture that you'll be engaging if you do talk to somebody that is a Muslim. Okay? Not all Muslims are Arabic, and so it might not have the same effect, but given the fact that I think most are, that's going to be something that you'll want to take into consideration. So Muhammad had a vision where he was taken to the throne of Allah, and during this process is when he started, being given the instructions and so forth. And basically, one thing to keep in mind is, I guess that's going to come up in the next slide. So he kind of was originally based out of Mecca, and then from there he eventually went to Medina. Because while he was in Mecca, he couldn't really get people to listen to the message that he was trying to preach. The people in Medina called out to him and said, "Hey, we need you to settle some disputes for us." And so he went over there and he went through that process and helped them coach them through that process. And then from what I understand is that afterwards he kind of led that community, became like a governor, so to say, for them. And then eventually led it in a battle against Mecca. I don't know the details there. You guys might be able to find out a little bit more, but there it is. So after Muhammad's death, and this is kind of where the whole Sunni and Shia thing comes up, two divisions come up in the Muslim community because they had to decide who was going to be the successor to Muhammad. All right. Now, Shia Muslims will follow an imam, a direct descendant of Muhammad's cousin Ali. Okay? And so, because Ali was the cousin, he was supposed to be what they felt the next person in line to rule over them. They said, hey, it needs to be this guy. Sunni Muslims, however, said that they need to elect a caliph. And the idea was that they believed that the unity of the Muslim community was more important than the strict family unity. Okay, and so if I remember right, Shia Muslims, you'll see those primarily in Iran. Their influence is kind of getting more around the world, but most of the Muslims that you see across the world are Sunni. Um, it's not to say you won't see Shia Muslims outside of Iran, but that's like where I think 90%, like where the population of Iran is like 90% or more Shia Muslim. And they get into huge, or at least they used to get into huge fights over this kind of stuff. So what they believe, and this is the biggest thing for them right here, is that God is one. Okay, and we've talked about this before. Is that for a Muslim, when we talk about Jesus and the Holy Spirit and Trinity and all this stuff, they're like, you guys are like Hindus. You guys believe in like multiple gods and all this, and we can try and explain all we want to. That's just a process that takes a lot longer for them because that's such a taboo thing for them. It's why when Islam tried to make its way into India and everything else, they had a really hard time because, of course, Hindus have not just one or two or three, they've got like millions of gods. They don't even bother trying to count it because they just, I'd have to go back to my studies, but I mean, it's almost like they don't feel like you can count the number of gods, that it just continues to multiply almost. That's not completely accurate. That's not the best way to describe it, but it gives you kind of the sense of just how many Hindus have. And so this is the biggest thing for them, is that God is one. And of course, we believe that too. We just take that into the Trinity. So they believe in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and Jesus. They just see them all as prophets. Okay? And then they see them as prophets like Muhammad, but they just say that Muhammad is the last one. And so for them, the idea is that you cannot draw the face of God or the prophets, because in doing so, you're going to lead to idol worship. Okay? So whenever you go and you look at Muslim art, if you see them trying to depict God or Jesus, or for them, Allah, or Muhammad, or Jesus, or any of these other prophets, their faces are going to be whitewashed. Because they don't want to worship them. They want to focus their worship on Allah. Okay? And this is one of the big things for them too, is that they believe that Jews were given a part of the truth with the law, but that they eventually distorted it. And that basically from there, Jesus arrived as a prophet. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. There's a Dr. Pepper's and other drinks in the fridge over there if you guys want to grab something.
All right.
So after that, Jesus arrives and basically as another prophet, according to the Muslims, and from there, Christians worshipped him as a god. And so then they went from there and said that they believe that the Quran is God's final clarification of his law. Okay? And so this is part of what they believe. We're not even actually done yet. Oops. So they do believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, but that he could speak in the manger. Also that he didn't actually die on the cross. Now, this part here there might be other versions of this. There might be different takes on this, but the things that I was reading basically kind of said that Jesus, instead of dying on the cross, one of his disciples came up and said, I will take your place. And so then God makes the disciple look like Jesus, and he goes up on the cross, and Jesus kind of gets whisked away. One thing that you will notice is that there's no real focus on original sin or atonement in Muslim theology. Most of the focus is more on following the commands and living in peace with God. and that God will forgive sins, disobedience based on repenting and actions done here on earth. And that, as far as I can tell, if you get into a conversation with a Muslim, they might tell you a little bit different on this, on really any of this, but from what I can tell from my studies, hell doesn't really seem to serve as this place of eternal punishment. It's more just revealing the sins that you committed during life, being punished for it, and then eventually being restored. So it's this thing where it's not eternal. It's just almost like cleaning and purifying somebody of the sin. So as far as Satan goes, Satan is more of just this is where one of those things where it gets really tricky because it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on in the story. So there's Jinn, and then there's Satan, and basically what you have is that Jinn were created, and some of the stories involve the Jinn actually like coming here on Earth and living, but there are stories where Jinn are good, and then there's stories where Jinn are bad. In fact, there's one story where Solomon actually puts the Jinn in slavery and has them building the temple. In fact, that story is really funny because of the fact that whenever Solomon dies, they had it set up where Solomon dies and he's leaning on a staff, and the Jinn keep working because they see him standing up and they think he's still alive. So in the text, Allah comes by and sends a worm or something to chew on the bottom of the staff until Solomon's dead body falls over, and then the Jinn realize that they've been duped the entire time. That's the story. So with Satan, it's this again, this is where one of those really crazy things where I had trouble understanding it when I was reading it. If you get into a conversation with a Muslim, they might be able to explain it better. But the explanation that I was reading was basically this, that Satan started off as an angel, which is something that we generally believe. And then from there, essentially, Allah told Satan, they call him Iblis, to bow down and obey Adam. And Satan refused. And so there are some stories where basically Satan just completely goes off the rails from there and just says, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to listen to anybody. And then there's another story that was really weird where it basically involves Satan kind of saying to somebody, again, this is where I want to be careful, especially because we're live and such, but it was almost as if they were trying to, the story was trying to portray Satan in this light of he would rather only worship Allah and not kind of bow down to Adam or anybody else, almost trying to portray him in this good light. So that was a thing that I had trouble understanding. But these are the 5 pillars to Islam right here. And that's that Allah is alone to be worshipped and Muhammad is his prophet, to pray beautifully and perfectly. It's something that's compelled, you're compelled to do it, but it's also voluntary. That 5 times daily is required, but that you also must be ritually pure to pray. The story behind this in the text is essentially that as Muhammad is going up to the heavens to visit Allah, Allah comes back and says, here are 50 prayers for your people to pray. And as Muhammad starts to go back out of heaven, he meets up with Moses, and Moses says, all right, what did God tell you? What did Allah give you? And so he tells him, he gave me 50 prayers. And Moses says, no, that's too much. Go back to God and tell him no. You need to reduce it. So they go back and forth until it comes down to 5. And then he finally goes back. You need to give to charity, and that's an obligation that you are expected to do that. That at least once in your life, you're to journey to Mecca, and that during the month of Ramadan, you're to fast. Feasting and fasting are 2 different things. Now, one thing I will say is that if I remember correctly, during Ramadan, it's not like a month-long fast like what we expect, where you only eat like juices or water, or you reduce it to a certain amount of things. Basically, what they do is from the sunrise to the sunset, your food intake is limited. But at sunset, you actually invite people into your home to enjoy the feast and celebrate with you. I don't remember what the purpose of Ramadan is, but that's the general idea, is that during the month, you're supposed to fast for this whole month. And there's a different reasons for all this happening, like, for example, it basically all involves turning your life consistently back to God, is the idea. So, that's what they believe. As far as how to reach them, what do you guys think? What are some things that you think would be good ways to reach them based on what we've discussed so far? I know that's a lot. What are some things that you notice that might be a little bit different from what we believe? We'll start there. Yeah. Okay. So hell is not eternal. Why is? Let's start from there. So hell. Okay. Eternal. Not. Right. All right. So now they're saying that with it being not eternal, that you're just experiencing punishment, but you'll eventually be restored, right? What about that? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's really just forever. What's the difference though? What's the main difference that trying to think of the word here?
They're saying like they're pretty much saying that no matter what, you're going to be restored.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
No matter what you do, you're going to be punished for a little while, but you're still going to have that heaven of it.
Yeah. And one thing I want to point out is that there are some people, even that claim the name of Christ, that actually believe this same concept. Okay? But what's the problem with this idea right here? Of what Casey was just saying, that you'll be punished for what you do here on earth, but eventually you're going to be restored.
You don't have a reason to do good or to be Christ like, because you know that no matter what, you're going to be punished temporarily, but you're still going to go to heaven.
There it is. I mean, I can suffer through a lot of different stuff. It's going to stink, but if I know that, I mean, that what they're talking about there, right there, is fire and it's pretty brutal. But if you know that you can be punished for so long, and then eventually you're going to be restored to God, that eventually you're going to get to this part where you are with Him in eternity, experiencing paradise and everything else, then whatever you do down here, you don't really have to focus on that so much. Because you'll experience the punishment, but you'll eventually be restored. Okay? And so that's one problem right there. What's something else? Anything else to caught your guys' attention?
They obligated to give to charity.
Obligated. Okay. Okay. And then, Casey, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that they don't think that Jesus died on the cross.
Okay.
That's all she said.
Okay. So first we're going to expand on Seth's, and then we're going to go back to Casey's. Okay. So Seth, obligation to give. Why did that strike you?
I don't know.
Did it strike you?
I think it started me a little bit because I'm like, what if they don't have anything to give? Like if they're just,
Okay.
what are they going to do after that? Well, if they're obligated to give, if they don't give, are they going to be punished? Yeah.
I don't know.
Or
That would
is
be
it
a
just they hope that they give? Like,
Yeah,
they
that-
hope that-
that would be a question for a Muslim, because I
If it
don't
was
know the
like
answer
maybe
to that.
they're forced to give, are they punished if they can't do that? But if they're obligated, they're kind of like just encouraged to and
Yeah.
really pushed to give.
Yeah, that would be an interesting question to find out. I mean, the fact that it's an obligation, that it's expected that you're going to do this, that you're supposed to, I would say that the idea would be, I would think from that the idea would be no matter how little you have, you're still expected to do something. Um, so, in fact, one thing that I was reading about was that the expectation you give is 140. It's not bad. I don't know where that number came from. What are we told? What does God ask us to give in the Bible? 10, right? You guys know what else that's called? Time. All right. And there's a biblical precedent for that in the Old Testament. I have to go back and find out exactly where that example is, where the idea of giving the first tenth it comes from. But it is in there that God expects you to give the first tenth back to Him. So, but, as far as with our belief, I don't know if it's kind of hard to pin that word down because it's one of those things where I feel like in what God expects of us with giving, there is kind of an expectation that you're going to do this, but at the same time, it's still fluid. That's one thing that you'll notice when you start exploring a lot of the deeper things of the faith is that a lot of things are a little bit more fluid than you might expect. This one being one of them. You should, if you can, absolutely be giving the 10th. There's the story of the woman with the mite and the Pharisee that approaches him. And the Pharisee approaches the altar box and he throws in all this money and he's all like, "Oh, look at me!" And then the poor widow woman comes by and she just drops in a copper coin. And Jesus says, that woman is doing more than the other guy because she's actually giving out of her poverty. Okay? So I don't know if she was actually giving the 10% or if she was just giving what she had, but either way, Jesus specifically pointed out that she was more honored because she was giving out of her poverty and not just throwing it in there and making a show. Okay, so Jesus didn't die. Now this is one that really clicked for me as like, hold on a second, because what was the reason that the Jews gave for putting Jesus to the Romans? What did they say he claimed to be?
Son of God.
Not just Son of God, because that wouldn't necessarily have bothered the Romans. In fact, that would have made them more hesitant to do anything against him. King. Why would it have bothered the Romans for Jesus to say, "I am king"?
The Romans had a great plan.
The Romans had a king. Yeah, the Romans had an emperor. And what was the relationship with the Jews? Just about. It wasn't quite like, it wasn't full slavery, but at the same time, the Jews didn't like the Romans, period. In fact, the conversation came up the other day about two of the apostles that Jesus called. One is Matthew, and where does Jesus find Matthew? He's a tax collector. And then if you go through the rest of the list, one of the other guys that Jesus calls is named Simon the Zealot. You guys know what a zealot is? Somebody who adamantly, viciously, physically opposes the Roman government. So you've got this guy that is, ready to go and kill Romans, and standing right next to him is a guy that just was working for the Romans. Imagine the conversations at the campfire. So, Simon, I'm just gonna, take first watch. Let you go to sleep first, okay? Here, you want me to hold on to your knife for you? Because I sure don't want you stabbing me while I'm sleeping, right? That's the kind of relationship. The Jews actually had frequent occasions where they rebelled against Rome. If you go into some of the writings that occurred between the Old Testament and the New Testament, you've got the Maccabean revolts where they actually successfully kicked the Romans out of Jerusalem for a time, and then it all goes completely haywire towards the end. So because Jesus claimed he was a king, the Jews were able to send Jesus to the Romans to have him killed. What did we say that the Muslims believe about Jesus? Not just that he switched him out. I mean, they do believe that. But what did they believe he was? Prophet. Do you think the Romans would have really cared if he was a prophet? Nope. Because at one point, Pilate's sitting there, getting on to the Jews and saying, look, if this is a matter of dispute of your laws, your religious laws, I really could care less. Take him back, beat him as much as you want, I don't care. But just don't kill him. This is a problem with your religious institutions. I don't give a rip. But he claimed he was king. That becomes a problem. The only reason that the Romans would have sent him to the cross is because he claimed he was a king. And that completely changes this conversation right here. Because if Jesus was only claiming he was a prophet, none of that would have happened. Okay? Some other things. Did you guys catch anything else?
Muhammad.
Muhammad, what about it?
You don't really hear much of Muhammad in the Christian body.
Yeah.
That much time.
Yeah, and you won't because Muhammad comes up like way after all the text for the Bible was written. Anything else?
What about that Jesus spoke to them in the nature?
Yeah, I don't know. One thing that you should kind of understand about some of that stuff is that kind of like what we talked about before with some of the cultural and textual stuff going on within the Bible. Some of the stuff that we might see might be something where it's a cultural, textual thing, but not something that they necessarily actually believe happened. So they might believe that Jesus actually talked in the manger. They might not. I don't know. That would be something to talk with them a little bit more about and say, I heard about this. Can you explain that more? Okay. Anything else?
Did they believe Jesus was sinless?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would assume so.
But then why would they not be?
Yeah. And that becomes kind of an issue right there as well. Because, what good would it have done for Jesus to go to the cross? Of course, I don't know. I don't know if they really believe prophets were sinless. That's a good question. But I think the sin question brings up a really important question that's underlying all of this. Okay? What we're saying right here that before they pray, they have to be ritually pure, right? They got to go and they got to wash their hands, right? Go back to this slide right here. Notice anything interesting about purity? About sin?
They'll focus on the original sin.
There's no focus on original sin. All right? If the focus is on obedience, okay, then there's no focus really on sin. It's not to say that they don't believe that you can do things that are wrong, but it's a completely different conversation. What's our little thing that we say about holy versus unholy? It's not about whether you're good or bad. It's about whether you're holy or unholy, right? And so the difference is that if you believe that man was created originally pure to be with God, then for there to be this issue where we would need to obey God and we would need to be restored to God, and if you believe that God in himself is holy, then that only leaves the conclusion that we are unholy without being made clean. And so without that focus on sin, why do you need to be pure? It's a good point to bring up when you talk to them. Now, I don't bring this up from the perspective of, I want you guys to sit there and get into an argument with them, okay? I don't want you to sit there and be rude and nasty to them and go, well, what about this, right? I just want you to be aware of this kind of stuff because this is the kind of stuff that you can bring up in a conversation that will hopefully trigger something in their mind and say, well, I haven't considered that. All right? Since that was the second bell, let's go ahead and go on to this slide right here. When you are going to talk with a Muslim, some things to keep in mind. Talking about Jesus is going to be a touchy subject. Why? Because they don't believe he's the Son of God, because you can't have more than one God. That God is one. To try and have a spirit and Jesus and all this other, stuff that we talk about, that's polytheism. It's not to say avoid the conversation, it's just don't make that the first conversation. Okay? Because that's going to be really, really uncomfortable for them. It'd be just as bad for me to sit there and introduce myself to Maddie and say, hi Maddie, I'm a Satanist. I'm going to go sacrifice some cats later on.
Okay.
And then I'm going to eat the hearts. Okay? Exactly. That's the exact likely reaction that they're going to have when you sit there and try and tell them, let me tell you about Jesus. He was the Son of God. He came and he was, even though he was a part of God, he was able to restore us and cleanse us of our sins. They're going to sit there and go, evil! Right? They're going to sit there and think, no. Okay? It's very uncomfortable to start that conversation off with that. One thing that I saw, and if you want to swing by my office, I've got a book about this, but start with the prodigal son. Because it actually tells the story from God's own perspective. Okay? Because it puts the role of God in the role of the Father, and it reestablishes the role of compassion, of mercy, and redemption, even though we don't deserve it. Okay? You can also start on common ground. The Muslim faith is huge on law and obedience. So if you start with God created and gave his law, that's going to be a great point of conversation to begin with. All right? So next week we're going to look over Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism because they're all kind of interrelated. So Sunday we've got games at the Student Center in KGB. We'll be at the Student Center from 4 to 8:30. We're going to do baked potato bar for dinner. So I'm going to take care of potatoes. We've already got cheese and sour cream. So I just need some people to bring meat, ranch, and then anything else that you guys can think of to add to baked potato. All right. Other than that, we got the lock-in this weekend. So love to see you guys if you're not doing anything. Bring a snack, dessert, and drink. Invite your friends. I love you guys. Think you're awesome. Thank you, Brian. And
That's my little brother, Jesus.
okay, I've seen you around Floyd, but I don't think I actually got your name before. So, Jesus, Brian, it's nice to see you guys again. Glad you guys came. So, I think you guys are awesome. Good luck on finals next week, too.
Last test is tomorrow.
I still
Good luck on finals.